So welcome students. Welcome students. As you know that we have started our chapter 6, local governments. So today students, we will be covering the topics introduction of 73rd and 74th amendments, and under the 73rd amendment, three-tier structure, reservation, transfer of subjects, state election commissioners, and state finance commission. So these will be our today's topics. So, so starting with the 73rd and the 74th amendment regarding the local governments. So in 1989, the central government introduced two constitutional amendments. These amendments aimed at strengthening local governments and ensuring an element of uniformity in their structure and functioning across the country. तो 1989 के अंदर सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट ने इंट्रोड्यूस किए दो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल अमेंडमेंट 73rd एंड 74। सो इन अमेंडमेंट्स का मतलब क्या था, एम क्या था? स्ट्रेंथनिंग लोकल गवर्नमेंट्स and ensuring an element of uniformity in their structure and functioning across the country. So, if we take one more example of the Brazil, the constitution of Brazil has created states, federal districts, and municipal councils. Brazil ने states बनाए, federal districts बनाए, municipal councils बनाए. So each of these is assigned independent powers और सबको जो है अलग अलग powers दी गई, अलग अलग जो है उनका jurisdiction दिया गया. Just as the republic cannot interfere in the affairs of the states except on grounds provided by the constitution, states are prohibited from interfering in the affairs of the municipal councils. So this provision protects the powers of the local governments. So later in 1992, now we are talking about India. Later in 1992, the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendments were passed by the parliament. The 73rd amendment is about rural local governments, which are also known as Panchayati Raj institutions or PRI. PRI, Panchayati Raj institutions. And 74th amendment made the provisions related to the urban local government. तो 74th provision जो है वो किसका है? Urban local governments का, नगर पालिकास का. So the 73rd and 74th amendments came into force in 1993. This you have to be keep in mind that 73 and 74th amendments came into force in 1993. So we have noticed earlier that local governments is a state subject. States are free to make their own laws on this subject. But once the constitution was amended, the states had to change their laws about local bodies in order to bring these in conformity with the amended constitution. So they were given 1 year's time for making necessary changes in their respective state laws in the light of these amendments. तो स्टेट्स को कहा गया, 1 साल का समय दिया गया कि अब लोकल गवर्नमेंट्स भी एग्जिस्ट हो रही थी 73rd और 74th अमेंडमेंट के थ्रू. तो अपने रूल्स रेगुलेशंस के अंदर, अपनी लिस्ट के अंदर स्टेट्स को जो है ऑल्ट्रेशन करना था, तो इसके लिए जो है 1 साल का समय दिया गया. Then we are talking of the 73rd amendment. So let us now try to understand the 73rd amendment. So let us now examine the changes brought about by the 73rd amendments in Panchayati Raj institution. तो पंचायती राज institutions के अंदर 73rd amendment जो है वो क्या changes लेके आया? So पहला क्या है? 3-tier structure. 3-tier structure. 3-tier structure means all states now have a uniform 3-tier Panchayati Raj structure. At the base is the Gram Panchayat. A Gram Panchayat covers a village or group of villages. The intermediary levels is the mandal, also referred as block or taluka. So these bodies are called mandal or taluka panchayats. The intermediary level body need not be constituted in smaller states. At the apex is the zilla panchayat covering the entire rural area of the district. So हर गांव के अंदर एक ग्राम पंचायत रहती है, फिर कुछ गांव मिलकर जो है क्लस्टर ऑफ विलेजेस एक ब्लॉक बनाते हैं, और बहुत से ब्लॉक जो हैं डिस्ट्रिक्ट के मिलकर जिला परिषद बनाते हैं और द जिला पंचायत. सो द अमेंडमेंट आल्सो मेड अ प्रोविजन फॉर द मैंडेटरी क्रिएशन ऑफ द ग्राम सभा. द ग्राम सभा वुड कंप्राइज, अब ग्राम सभा जो है वो किन की बनी होती है? द ग्राम सभा वुड कंप्राइज ऑफ ऑल द अडल्ट मेंबर्स रजिस्टर्ड एज वोटर्स इन द पंचायत एरिया. और किसी गांव के जो वोटर्स होते हैं, एडल्ट वोटर्स जिनकी उम्र 18 या 18 साल से ऊपर है, ठीक है, अपने पंचायत एरियाज के अंदर वो ग्राम सभा बनाते हैं. और उनका रोल क्या है? इट्स रोल एंड फंक्शन आर डिसाइडेड बाय द स्टेट लेजिस्लेशन. और उनका रोल और फंक्शन जो है वो कौन डिसाइड करता है? स्टेट लेजिस्लेशन. सो देन वी आर मूविंग विद द रिजर्वेशन और we are moving first with the elections. All the three levels of Panchayati Raj institutions are elected directly by the people. तो जो भी levels हैं पंचायती राज के तीनों, as we have talked about the ग्राम सभा, ब्लॉक समिति और the जिला परिषद, these institutions are elected directly by the people. If the state government dissolves the panchayat before the end of its 5-year term, यदि स्टेट गवर्नमेंट 5 साल पूरा होने से पहले ही ग्राम पंचायत को भंग कर देती है, तो क्या होता है? फ्रेश इलेक्शंस मस्ट बी हेल्ड विद इन 6 months. और 6 महीनों के अंदर अंदर जो है दोबारा इलेक्शंस होने होंगे डिसोल्यूशन के बाद. सो दिस इज एन इम्पोर्टेंट प्रोविजन दैट एंश्योर्स द एग्जिस्टेंस ऑफ elected local bodies. Before the 73rd amendment, in many states there used to be indirect elections to the district bodies, and there was no provision for immediate elections after dissolution. अगर ग्राम सभा या ग्राम पंचायत जो है वो भंग हो जाती है, तो पहले ऐसा 73rd प्रोविजन से पहले ऐसा कोई प्रोविजन नहीं था कि एकदम से इलेक्शन जो है वो करवाए जाए. वो कब आया? वो 73rd अमेंडमेंट के कारण ही आया. Then we talk about the reservations. So 1/3 of the positions in all panchayat institutions are reserved for women. 1/3 जो है वो women के लिए रिजर्व किया गया है. Reservations for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes are also provided for at all the 3 levels. So तीनों levels के अंदर जो है scheduled caste, scheduled tribe के लिए भी तीनों लेवल के अंदर ही रिजर्वेशन रखा गया है. वुमेन के लिए भी 1/3 रिजर्वेशन रखा गया है. So in proportion to their population, उनके population के according जो है रिजर्वेशन किया गया है. If the states find it necessary, they can also provide for reservation for backward caste. अगर states को लगता है कि OBCs को भी रिजर्वेशन देना है तो वो दे सकती है. So it is important to note that these reservations apply not merely to ordinary members in panchayats but also to the positions of chairpersons or adhyakshas at all the 3 levels. So further reservation of 1/3 of the seats for women is not merely in the general category of seats but also within the seats reserved for scheduled caste, scheduled tribes and backward castes. So this means that a seat may be reserved simultaneously for a woman candidate and one belong to the scheduled caste or the scheduled tribes. So thus a sarpanch would have to be a Dalit woman or an Adivasi woman. Then we see the transfer of the subjects. So 29 subjects which were earlier in the state list of subjects are identified and listed in the 11th schedule of the constitution. So these subjects are to be transferred to the Panchayati Raj institutions. तो 29 ऐसे सब्जेक्ट्स जो स्टेट लिस्ट के अंदर देखे गए 11th शेड्यूल कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के तहत जो है इन सब्जेक्ट्स को ट्रांसफर किया गया किसके अंदर? पंचायती राज इंस्टीट्यूशंस के अंदर. These subjects were mostly linked to development and welfare functions at the local level. The actual transfer of these functions depends upon the state legislation. Each state decides how many of these 29 subjects would be transferred to the local bodies. तो ये स्टेट लेजिस्लेशन या स्टेट देखेगी कि कितने सब्जेक्ट्स को जो है ट्रांसफर करना है, 29 को करना है या उससे कम सब्जेक्ट्स को जो है कन्वर्ट करना है पंचायती राज इंस्टीट्यूशंस के अंदर. सो आर्टिकल कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन का 243G powers, authority and responsibility of panchayats. The legislature of a state may, by law, endow the panchayats with such powers and authority with respect to the matters listed in the 11th schedule. तो आर्टिकल 23G जो है वो पावर्स, अथॉरिटी और रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी देता है पंचायत्स को. ठीक है, जो पहले लिस्ट 11th शेड्यूल कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के अंदर जो सब्जेक्ट्स रखे गए थे अब वो ट्रांसफर किए गए हैं स्टेट टू द पंचायत्स. सो सम सब्जेक्ट्स लिस्टेड इन द 11th शेड्यूल. तो 11th शेड्यूल के अंदर जो सब्जेक्ट्स लिए गए, जो 29 सब्जेक्ट्स जिनके ऊपर जो है स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स पहले लेजिस्लेशन बनाती थी, अब पावर जो है पंचायत के पास चली गई है. और फर्स्ट वी सी दैट एग्रीकल्चर, माइनर इरिगेशन, water management and watershed development, small scale industries including food processing industries, rural housing, drinking water, roads, culverts, rural electrification, poverty alleviations programs, education including primary and secondary schools, technical training and vocational education, adult and non-formal education, libraries, cultural activities, markets and fairs, health and sanitation, including hospitals, primary health centers and dispensaries, family welfare, women and child development, social welfare, welfare of the weaker sections and in particular of the scheduled caste and the scheduled tribes, and public distribution system. So these subjects were transferred to the panchayats. So the provisions of the 73rd Amendment were not made applicable to the areas inhabited by the Adivasis populations in many states of India. So in 1996, a separate act was passed extending the provision of the panchayats system to the Adivasi areas or the tribal areas. So many Adivasi communities have the traditional customs of managing common resources such as forests and small water reservoirs, etc. So therefore, the new act protects the rights of these communities to manage their resources in ways acceptable to them. For this purpose, more powers are given to the Gram Sabha of these areas, and elected village panchayats have to get the consent of the Gram Sabha in many respects. So the idea behind this act is that local traditions of self-government should be protected while introducing modern elected bodies. So this is only consistent with the spirit of diversity and decentralization. तो आदिवासीज को जो है भी उनको अपना ट्रेडिशन जो कस्टम्स थी बना के रखने का मौका दिया गया और मॉडर्न ट्रांजिशन जो थे वो भी किए गए. So next is the state election commissioners. State election commissioners. The state government is required to appoint a state election commissioner who would be responsible for conducting elections to the Panchayati Raj institutions. So earlier this task was performed by the state administration, which was under the control of the state government. Now the office of the state election commissioner is autonomous, like the election commissioner of India. However, the state election commissioner is an independent officer and is not linked to, nor is this officer under the control of the election commission of India. So now the state government has required to appoint a state election commissioner who would be responsible for conducting elections to the Panchayati Raj institutions. Then further is the State Finance Commission. The State Finance Commission, the state government is also required to appoint a State Finance Commission once in 5 years. This commission would examine the financial position of the local governments in the state. It would also review the distribution of revenues between the state and the local governments on the one hand and between rural and urban local governments on the other. So this innovation ensures that allocation of funds to the rural and local will not be a political matter, will not be a political matter. So now we have seen in this lecture that we have studied deeply about the 73rd amendment, which is related to the panchayati raj institutions in the rural areas. So next, in the next lecture we will be studying about deeply about the 74th amendment. So thank you students for joining. Thank you and have a nice day. Thank you.